Hey everyone, this is Sam Black back with the March of the Machines set review for green cards. As always, this is sorted by the game in hand win rate on 17 lands. We're just going to go best to worst and explain what's going on with these things. So at the top we have Vorinclex, a 5 mana 6/6 trample reach. So 5 mana for a 6/6 trample reach. With a lot of these like mythics that are among the top performing cards, I've been kind of looking at like how good is it if we just ignore all these words and just kind of go with like the baseline. So if you ignore the entire text box and this is just a 5 mana 6/6, that would be like, you know, we've had 5 mana 5/5 pretty often at common. 5 mana 6/6 would be, I mean, like 5 mana 5/5 is an unexciting playable in Kaldheim, for example. 5 mana 6/6 in this format seems like it would be okay. Might make your deck sometimes. It wouldn't be anything special. With Trample and Reach, now it's a pretty good card. I'd be pretty happy to play 6/6 Trample Reach, no other text in this format. I think that would be a pretty good common. Or like, it would be weird these days to see an uncommon that's just like numbers and keywords, I think. So anyway, this has some more text. You get 2 forests for free right away. That's very good. I'd say roughly as good as draw 1 card, give or take. And plus a card on a playable is getting you into very, very good. And then also this has 8 mana, which is a lot. No other requirements though, just 8 mana. And you already have 5 to cast this thing, and it found 2 more lands for you. So you're probably going to have 8 mana on turn 8 or whatever, 3 turns from when you play Vorinclex. And then the first chapter is mill 10 cards, put up to 2 creature cards from among the milled cards onto the battlefield. So you're down a 6/6 trample, but you're up some things. I'd say your board is probably about as good, give or take, maybe a little bit better after you activate this. Then the second chapter, obviously you need to be able to mill 10 cards without killing yourself, which is not always going to be the case that late, especially after you've pulled some cards out, but there'll be spots where you do that. Then you distribute 7 +1/+1 counters among target creatures, any number of target creatures you control. I am reading this live. I have literally no clue what the third chapter is going to do. I've always just died to the 6/6, and we've never gone through this saga. 7 counters is a good number of counters. That feels like the kind of thing that's going to put you very far ahead. And then at the last chapter, until end of turn, creatures you control gain 1. This creature fights target creature you don't control. Exile this and return to the battlefield. That sounds like it's after we just distributed a bunch of counters, going to kill other creatures. This feels like it pretty reliably wins the game if you pay 8 mana, if you have 15 or so cards in your library. Yeah. Again, without any of that, this card is really, really good, so no surprise to see it at the top of the standings. Yeah, this is a good one. Up next, Glistening Dawn. This card is super messed up. The win rate here is in the realm of like normal good rares, not absolute bombs, but I feel like I like this more than a lot of the other like 61 and change type cards. So this is incubate X twice, where X is the number of lands you control. If you have any number of lands, this is really good. I've literally seen someone play this with 3 lands in play to incubate 3 twice, and it was fine. In the super late game, where it's just like incubate 8 twice, it's just obscene. This card is really, 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 really strong. And you can, it's one of those like busted sorceries that you can realistically rebuy with the scab. not that I really think you need to very often. Just getting 2 huge bodies, like there are answers to tokens, like there are bounce things and stuff, but like it's very rare. They're set up to be real creatures in this format, and so your opponent's really not going to be able to like answer 2 of them for free. This is just like a really, really good, resilient, efficient threat. And not efficient in the sense of like it wins the game early, but efficient in the sense of like you don't spend that much mana for the size that you get, and it scales super well if you go late. This thing's fantastic. Yes, it is really, really, really sick with Halo Forged. With the Halo Forager. Yeah, I think it's just Halo Forager. The blue-black fairy. 7 is a very realistic amount of mana, and then you presumably incubate 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever twice after having already done Glistening Dawn, and also making a 3/1 flyer, and it's very hard to imagine losing after all that. Up next, Doomscar Warrior. 4/3 backup 1 trample for 4 mana. When this enters the battlefield, when this creature deals combat damage to a player or battle, look at that many cards from the top of your library. You may reveal a creature or land from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. This is a nice one. 4/3 for 4. 4/3 trample for 4 is a bad common. 4/3 trample backup 1 is a good common. Because now you're looking at a 5/4 trample that's slightly better than that. And then in practice, this thing is very good at finding you more cards. I've rarely had a spot where my opponent plays a Doomscar Warrior, and I feel like it's just really easy to set up a spot where when you play this, you connect with something else and draw a card, and then you have this like very large creature that's threatening to draw more cards. It's really easy to fall behind this thing and just get run over. I'm a little bit surprised though that this has better stats than Ancient Imperiosaur. Ancient Imperiosaur is really good. So to go for the what's the simplest common version of this, that card exists. It's called Siegeworm. It costs the exact same mana and has Convoke and is a 5/5. It might have trample. I'm not sure. I don't remember. This is all upside from there, and it's not a small amount of upside. Ward 2 is pretty good. This is okay. Siegeworm does have trample, so this is 1/1 bigger than Siegeworm and also has Ward 2. That's pretty good, but also for every creature that convokes it, it gets 2 additional +1/+1 counters. So if you convoke this with a single creature, it is an 8/8 trample with Ward 2, making it bigger than basically everything else. If you convoke it with a lot of creatures, your opponent better have a cheap removal spell, because this thing ends the game immediately. And no amount of chump blocking or double blocking is really going to say anything about it if you convoked this with multiple creatures. This thing is pretty crazy. Also, you really don't have to work hard for this, since, it's a very good rate if you have a single creature in play and you spend... it's not a very good rate. If you spend 6 mana for an 8/8 trample Ward 2, that's about fair. If you spend 5 mana for a 10/10 trample Ward 2, that's unreasonable. If you spend 4 mana on turn 4, it's obscene. But again, you can just put it in any deck. You don't need to draft a super great Convoke deck. This thing is just going to be one of your best cards. Up next, Invasion of Ixalan. This is I feel like there's a giant gap between Imperiosaur and Invasion of Ixalan, which is interesting because in practice they're only 0.7% different. But Imperiosaur feels like an enormous, like just a super high impact card, whereas Invasion of Ixalan is a very like low impact nuts and bolts card, right? Like the front side is a very good. The front side, so this card's great. I don't mean to be underselling this card, because like Impulse is good, and this is 2 mana to look at 5 cards, which is more than Impulse. It's sorcery speed rather than instant, but you're still getting a ton of selection. And then you can reveal a permanent card from among them. Now, admittedly, that's not all cards, but you're not going to miss on looking for a permanent within 5 cards, and you're going to get a good amount of selection. And then on top of that, you get a 4 defense battle, which is not very much. Basically the standard. And it turns into a 4/3 trample, which, again, you've only spent 2 mana for and you're not down a card. And then whenever you cast a spell, it gains indestructible until end of turn. It means that you just kind of having mana up represents a very strong combat trick, so it's really, really hard to, like, try to block or kill this thing. So this is a great card. It's just... Yeah, I don't know. It makes sense to me. It makes sense to me that it's great. It's just great in such a different way than Imperiosaur. That makes sense. Up next, and this this one feels like a pretty big step down from Invasion of Ixalan to me. But again, it's only 0.4% down. Polukranos Reborn, green for a 4/5 reach. You can spend 6 in a Phyrexian white to transform it, and then it transforms into a Wormcoil Engine with reach instead of Death Touch. The reason that this feels like a bigger step down is just that it's so hard to cast. Fortunately, it's still very good if you're casting it on turn 5 or whatever. But it's not easy to cast on turn 3. If you do, it can be pretty oppressive. But largely, this playing against it, it's very strong. Sometimes it wins games. But I've played, blue against this a lot and been in a lot of spots where my opponent invests a lot of mana and I can, like, bounce it or put it on top of their deck or lock it down or something. And, we play a pretty interesting game from there because this thing did buy them some time as just a 4/5 reach before they tried to transform it and stuff. I don't know. It's, like, good, but I have passed it early because I didn't want to deal with the triple green. So, really, really strong card, but a very, very serious restriction in the casting cost here. Up next, Wrenn and Realmbreaker. This is a 3-mana planeswalker with 4 loyalty, and lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color as a static. For +1, it untaps up to 1. Sorry, it not untap. It critically does not untap. It targets up to 1 land, and that land, if it was tapped, stays tapped, and becomes a 3/3 elemental creature with vigilance, hexproof, and haste until your next turn. That makes, like, the hexproof here is pretty nice. You don't risk your lands. The vigilance is nice. It attacks and blocks as long as you have, a mana to spare in leaving this land untapped to block. -2, mill 3 cards. You can put a permanent from among them into your hand. And then -7 for an emblem with you may play lands and cast permanents from your graveyard. So your graveyard is just kind of always in your hand once you get the emblem. Yeah, chat points out that it kind of weirdly has a lower opening hand win rate than later, with the idea being the open. If it's in your opening hand, you can potentially like plus it and try to get to the emblem. Whereas if you draw it later, the -2 is like on for a good amount of selection right away. The way that this format is set up, I think protecting it early isn't trivial. Not a whole lot more to say about that part of this. Yeah, this has generally felt like it gets a good amount of value, but it's not that hard to get off the board in my like relatively limited experience playing against this. It does, I guess it feels about like a 3-mana Planeswalker feels in Limited. It does the Planeswalker thing, but as a 3-mana Planeswalker, it doesn't, automatically dominate a game by itself. You need to kind of do other stuff. It's not going to be enough by itself. But as long as you can keep parity, which this thing, reasonably helps you do with getting you more cards or blockers or whatever, then it's going to be a Planeswalker in Limited. But yeah, not a super bomb, but a strong card. Speaking of, we keep seeing these like 0.4% that just feel like such a big gap, going from this Planeswalker to this Watchwolf. One Streetwise Negotiator, 1 and a green for an 0/2 backup 1. This creature assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. I rarely see this backup something else, certainly more rarely than most other backup creatures. Usually this is just played on turn 2 as a functional 3/3. It's a little bit worse, I would say, than just being a 3/3 because it doesn't fight well. You can't use it with fight spells. But a 2-mana 3/3 is very good in this format, and backup, certainly gives the creature some semi-haste and stuff. There are times when it does other things. Noted as good with Mutagen Connoisseur. That's certainly true for giving you a big hit, and I can let you flip a battle pretty easily. Yeah, this is just a really good card. It just lines up really, really well against the other 2 and 3 drops in the format. Significantly overstated. Also really good with Tetsuko, yeah. Up next, Tandem Takedown. This is, I think of it kind of as a clear shot variant. I think it's a little bit worse than clear shot due to being double green. This is 1 GG instant. Up to 2 target creatures you control each get +1/+0. They each deal damage equal to their power to another target creature, planeswalker, or battle. So this is better than clear shot in that if your opponent has a single removal spell, you have 2 different things doing damage. So if both of them are big enough to take something out, if each of them is big enough to take something out, then you get to kill their thing through a removal spell. So it's a little bit safer to fire this off into open mana. Also, since you get to combine the powers of 2 small creatures while pumping both of them, this can take down big targets pretty easily. On the other hand, +1/+0 is much worse as a combat trick than +1/+1. And so you're less likely to get the blowouts where you like save a creature from something or in combat or from a removal spell or whatever, and then also kill their thing. Between the like missing 1 toughness and the extra green, I like this a little bit less overall. But also clear shot is like a really impressive card most of the time. I have been, I think, personally like undervaluing Tandem Takedown despite knowing that it's very good because I'm like that. But yeah, this is a really solid removal spell. It doesn't get around the issue with fight spells that you have to have a like something in play to use it. but it does get around a lot of the other issues with fight spells, in terms of like, you don't need to have a big creature in order to kill a big creature, and you have resilience against removal and response and stuff like that. And sometimes you get some extra value in combat out of the +1 powers. Up next, Ozolith, the Shattered Spire. When in a green legendary artifact, if one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on an artifact or creature you control, that many +1/+1/+1 counters are put on it instead. And then for 1 in a green, you can tap it and put a counter on target artifact or creature you control as a sorcery, and it cycles for 2 mana. So Ozolith, I played a decent amount in Sealed recently, and anytime you can get into like a real stall, it puts a lot of numbers on the board over time pretty quickly. It's really good with keywords just in general. I played a game where my opponent just played turn 1 Ichor Drinker, turn 2 Ozolith, and then just put counters on the Ichor Drinker for a while. And that was like a pretty good plan, though it's dangerous if the opponent can answer the Ichor Drinker and you spent all of your mana on that, and then you just don't have anything else. But you get a big life buffer there. Like, it's important to do something like that with Ichor Drinker specifically, where the lifelink matters a lot. But I will say that I've certainly experienced spots where this is clunky. It is expensive to use, and it's sorcery speed only, but I mean, it's the ceiling, like the games where you're actually in a stall, this works really well. So strong card, but it does seem a little bit too mana intensive to be like a top bomb. Obviously gets a lot better the more like +1/+1 counters you're naturally putting on it, so you can get more value out of its like static ability without needing to sink mana into it. Up next, Tangled Skyline. 5 mana for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 5 life and incubate 5, and then Phyrexians you control have reach. I really like this card. The 5 life is really big for stabilizing, in addition to like giving reach. So you know, if you have any other Phyrexians, you really don't need to worry about flyers. And then you get a 5/5. That's pretty big. My favorite thing with Tangled Skyline is I feel like it's, you know, the best, at least the best non-rare, if not the best card in the set to scroll shift. Turning scroll shift into like instant speed, incubate 5, gain 5 draw card is really huge. This is obviously being way better than the other cards in its cycle to scroll shift, both because of the larger incubate number, and more importantly because of the gain 5 life. There's like I really like Tangled Skyline and Scroll Shift as the base of like a green-white control kind of like value deck that is a very, very different take than like the green-white backup deck. But yeah, outside of that, this plays well in like the blue-green Corruption of Twashi type decks, of course, and just any defensive green deck in particular, this card's going to be great. Speaking of cards that are good in defensive green decks, up next we have Herbology Instructor. 1 in a green for a 1/3 ETB gain 3 life. Side note, 3 mana for a 1/3 ETB gain 3 life. Good defensive card, pretty weak card overall. Fortunately, this thing has 6 Phyrexian black to transform, and then it becomes a 3/3. And when it does that, it gives something -0/-X until end of turn, where X is its power. So this is, you know, you flip over and you kill something, and you turn your 1/3 into a creature that like meaningfully fights. This card's good. The 3 life ends up mattering a lot. This is a nice one to have in your like Scroll Shift and Unseal the Necropolis type deck. Just a good defensive creature. Not great in your like red-green battle aggro decks, but pretty good in your like multicolor green-based grindy decks. Up next, Cosmic Hunger has taken the top common slot, well, tied with Arachnoid Adaptation, which had it for a long time. So Cosmic Hunger, 1 and a green, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature, planeswalker, or battle. Instant. This is basically like what you want a common fight spell to be these days. You rarely get them for 1 mana unless they're like a lot worse than this. This is instant speed and one-sided. Like their creature doesn't hit yours, and it's an instant. So this is about as close as you're getting to a green Doomblade at common. Has the usual fight spells issues, but it's best in class at being that thing. It's an instant to in addition to just like being an instant for all the normal reason that instant speed removal is good. Since this can hit battles, this is a way to flip battles at instant speed, which lets you cast like creature on the back at sorcery speed to ambush your opponent in combat or something like that. So yeah, solid removal spell. Not the green card that I personally take highest, but that's because I typically draft green as more of like the multicolor deck that's prioritizing fixing, and less as a deck that's putting a lot of power into play early. I think this is at its best in green in Naya decks, either green-white backup where you are making creatures that have a lot of power quickly, or in green-red battles, I think is where it's actually best. There you want high power creatures, and you can like do the attacking battles thing and stuff like that. Up next, Arachnoid Adaptation. Green instant, target creature gets +2/+2 and gains reach until end of turn. Untap it. Yeah. This being tied for the highest stats among green commons does not reflect how anybody drafts it. You can see an average taken at 11th pick here. And it's not played very much. But it continues to have a really good win rate when it is played. I don't recommend drafting it comparably to other cards with its win rate. You will get way too many of them, and you can just table it instead, since it is taken 11th on average. Well, after 11th, actually. Question about what deck wants it. I think it's like generically fine in a lot of green decks. It's just a really nice tempo play. Like, it does a lot of the same stuff that Aerial Boost, the best white common, does. And I think people expect it a little bit less than Boost, since Boost is, a little stronger, I think, and played more. But this also untaps, which means that, there's like the situations where your opponent totally doesn't see it coming are a little bit different. And then also it counters the white removal spell, Cut Short, which kills a tapped creature, which is pretty nice. I listened to a little bit of the new podcast by Ham and Lolaman last night. And Lola made a really good point about tricks in this format, which is that because your opponent... This format is different than other formats in that it's a lot more likely that your opponent taps out pre-combat before attacking. because both backup and battle often want you to play a card before you attack. You'll play a battle pre-combat so that you can attack the battle, and you'll play a backup creature pre-combat to get the backup ability. And that means that defensive tricks work a lot better because your opponent's so much less likely to have mana up on their turn. Transform, also another great example, yes. And so cards like this that are primarily intended as defensive tricks are kind of a lot better than they've been in any other format because it's so much safer to go for it than it usually is. And your opponent is so highly incentivized to not play around it and to play into it because, like, the allure of getting to play and flip a battle is so high. And it's still the case that people actually have this card in their hand pretty rarely. And so it's not that hard to set up a spot where you have a green mana up, your opponent attempts to like play flip their battle, and instead they play a battle, you untap your creature, you kill their attacker. Now they spent their mana on this battle instead of continuing to develop the board. So they're like really far out of position here. And that can easily swing an entire game. So that's part of the reason that this card performs a lot better than like green tricks often do. So definitely one that I think, most people should look to play a little bit more than they're currently playing it. Up next, Sandstalker Moloch. 1GG 4/2 flash when it enters the battlefield if an opponent has cast a blue or black spell this turn. The good thing about this, incidentally, is that your opponent is unusually likely to have cast a blue or black spell because blue and black are really good. And that applies a lot more in like high-ranked best of one because of the way that you don't play in pod and you can play against the same decks over and over. I think that you just see a lot more blue and black cards than like red cards or something. So anyway, yeah, so if your opponent has played a blue or black spell this turn, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a permanent card from among them, put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom in any order. 4/2 flash is not great. It can like ambush attackers that it's usually going to trade. But getting like a 4/2 flash is very good at being worth a card. Like it's going to trade with something real very, very easily. And so if you get to trigger this and you go up a card, this is just like really, really, really clean, non-tempo negative card advantage, which makes it very, very good uncommon anytime you can get it to trigger. And then, of course, if your best cards are permanents, it's doing a lot of work to dig towards your bombs. And then also, yes, like Arachnoid adaptation, this has the same thing where it's really good at punishing your opponent for playing like a blue or black battle pre-combat. Up next, Overgrown Pest. 2 and a green for a 2/2 ETB. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You can reveal a land or double-faced card from among them and put it in your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in any order. So this card is great. I really, really like Overgrown Pest. It does like the Borderland Ranger thing where it's just a 3-mana 2/2 that finds a land, and that's always good. It really helps with your fixing and stuff. Slightly less good than like Borderland Ranger at doing that thing because you can't play like one of a splash land and just search your whole deck for it. In exchange, this gets to find any double-faced card. And a lot of your, premium cards are going to be double-faced cards. And having this thing that, like, you're expecting to dig for a land, but in the late game gets to dig for a bomb is just pretty crazy. My prioritization of Overgrown Pest goes up really a lot if I first pick, especially, like, not just a good battle, but a battle that's, like, great in the late game. So for example, Invasion of Fiora, for example, I really actively want to play green if that card's in my deck so that I can have pests to help find it. Up next, Invasion of Aquaria. Green X. When it enters the battlefield, search your library and or graveyard for a non-human creature card with mana value X or less and put it on the battlefield. If you search your library this way, shuffle. And then the back is an 8/8 reach that gives all of your creatures the Rocks ability. They can assign combat damage directly to a player, even if they're blocked. My best experience with this was when I had it in a deck with Polukranos, because Polukranos is easily worth 5 mana, and so it just let me spend 5 to put Polukranos into play, and then threatened to transform into an 8/8 reach that wins the game. Yeah. If you don't have Polukranos in your deck, it's still pretty good, but not as good. I imagine you're likely to have some other strong creature, but Polukranos being so above rate because of its color restrictive cost was a really, really nice fit. This card is I think strong regardless. It is a lot of defense, but you really kind of get what you pay for in the defense when you flip this thing. Exactly how good it is, as with any tutor, is just going to depend on like what your best thing to find is. Up next, Converter Beast, 4 mana for an 0/1. When it enters the battlefield, incubate 5. Yeah, I've liked this card a lot. Gives you a body to scroll shift or to sacrifice or just chunk block with. And then incubate 5. 5 is a very good size for an incubate token because it beats all the other incubate tokens and most other creatures. Just nothing flashy, solid common. Up next, Blighted Burgeoning. This is another one that I value very highly since I'm looking for fixing in my green decks. Really like the ramp on this. And in particular, it plays super, super well with Portent Tracker, the 2 mana 1/1 that can tap to untap a land. If you Portent Tracker into Burgeoning, the natural thing to do is you then use the tracker to untap the land that you put the Burgeoning on, and then use that 2 mana to wake up the incubate creature, which is very nice. I'm a huge fan of this one. I view it as somewhat comparable to Overgrown Pest, not as good at finding your bombs, but a little bit better at fixing your mana, and actually ramps you, which is nice. They both kind of give you like a 2/2 and an extra land as like a default, but this one ramps but costs more mana to get the 2/2. It's like better at fixing, but worse at like digging for bombs. I'm often like the same decks want both of them, and I'm usually just like, if I see either, I'll take it, and I don't really care that much which mix I have. As far as stats, Overgrown Pest is better, but it's by 0.2%. They're really similar. Up next, Storm the Seedcore. 2 GG for a sorcery. Distribute 4 counters among up to 4 creatures you control. Creatures you control gain vigilance and trample until end of turn. I'm actually a little surprised by how good the stats are on this card. This is the kind of card that I think often has pretty bad stats, in that it's very situational. Like there are going to be times where it's great and times when it like doesn't work. Obviously, it's a good format for it. Makes it pretty easy to flip battles, and getting vigilance plus trample and making your guys big leads to like a really good attack that doesn't leave you vulnerable to a counterattack. And yeah, super explosive with other cards that have +1/+1 synergies, like Kami of Whispered Hopes, or the green-white Botanical Brawler, or the Ozolith. I have generally stayed away from this card just because my decks typically aren't aggressive in the way this is looking for, but it can certainly be very strong if you are like doing the thing that this is doing. But I don't like it in more defensive decks. Up next, Deeproot Wayfinder. This card is very comparable stats to Wary Thespian, which feels right to me, sadly. This is a rare 2/3. When it deals combat damage to a player or battle, surveil 1, then you may return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Quite good if it ever actually like connects, but it's like up 1 toughness on other 2-drops, kind of like on a generic 2/2, which helps it connect sometimes, but like if you're on the draw, it's really hard to connect with this. It's fine. It's a good rate, but it's really nothing special. Wary Thespian is 1 and a green for a 3/1 when it enters or dies, surveil 1. So you're like guaranteed to get 1, very likely to get 2 surveils off of this, whereas I feel like a lot of the time the Deeproot Wayfinder won't surveil at all. The Deeproot Wayfinder has the advantage of getting land back if it all works out, but I feel like it's just so unlikely to happen very much that I kind of prefer the like guaranteed immediate surveil to fix your draws on the Thespian. 2/3 I would say is slightly better stats than 3/1. Like it's 1 more total, which I think accounts for the like slightly better win rate on the Wayfinder. But I think that like this gap in pick order I think is not justified. Wayfinder I think is getting overrated due to being a rare. Better together very slightly. Up next, Finn the Fang Bearer. 2 mana for a 1/3 Death Touch. Whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. I think it's about creature sizing, but like Finn has been nowhere near as good as it was in Kaldheim. I think there are just a lot more like 3/3s in this format than there were in Kaldheim. Just like stuff that is about the same size as Finn and trades with Finn, whereas in Kaldheim it felt like there were a bunch of little creatures that Finn kind of dominated, and then like big stuff that really didn't want to trade with it. And here it feels like it's more just stuff where your opponent is like, okay, these trade, who cares? Still like, a solid body and good with fight spells, but it was a card I was always really happy to see in Kaldheim, and here I mostly ignore. Up next, Seed of Hope. Green instant, mill 2 cards. You may put a permanent card from among the milled cards into your hand, gain 2 life. Yeah, also true that Finn likes equipment, and Kaldheim had better equipment than this set does. Though I will say that Finn does like a beat stick. Putting beat stick on Finn feels great. The Beamtown beat stick, then you get a 2-powered Death Touch Menace creature, so it kills any 2 creatures your opponent blocks with, and if your opponent doesn't throw 2 creatures under the bus, you get a treasure. I think that's a nice little combo to look for in red-green aggressive decks. So Seed of Hope. This is a very good card selection spell if you have very few instants and sorceries in your deck. Gain 2 life on top of card selection is, nice little perk. If this is finding your best cards and you have like 5 or fewer non-Seed of Hope misses, I think this is quite good. It drops off pretty quickly with more misses than that. and gets a little better with fewer misses than that. You might want to avoid it if your best cards are instants and sorceries. Like if this is risking making it impossible for you to draw your Sunfall instead of like helping to dig you to your Invasion of Fiora, or maybe finding it. That's a pretty big difference. So you really want to think about like what your best cards are when figuring out if Seed of Hope is a card that you want or not. But if your green deck happens to incidentally have a small number of instants and sorceries, then you really want to pick up one or two of these because the ceiling is very high and they're available basically for free in the draft. Up next, Invasion of Zendikar, 4 mana for an explosive vegetation with 3 defense, and when you kill it, you get a 4/4 vigilant haste that taps for a mana of any color and is a land on the battlefield. So interesting that this has like appreciably lower stats than Overgrown Pest and Blighted Burgeoning as far as like the green fixing goes. I typically value this pretty highly since it's very, very good fixing, and really good in the just like all the really strong cards green decks. I would primarily take away that this must be bad. Well, like, I think that you probably don't want to play this if you aren't playing a, greedy mana base with expensive cards that are useful to ramp into. If you're just kind of like a normal 2-color deck, this probably isn't where it's at. Yeah. I don't know. I think that this is one that definitely has the potential to be a lot better than, like, for it to be correct to value it much more highly than its stats if you already have, like, the good rares that this is letting you be, like, greedily cram into your deck. Up next, Portent Tracker. Similar situation here. So Portent Tracker has relatively low stats. This is a 1/1 for 2. Tap to untap a land. Tap, choose target battle. If an opponent protects it, remove a defense counter from it. Otherwise, put a defense counter on it. Activate only as a sorcery. I will say, dragging its stats down very slightly compared to its potential is the fact that I think a lot of people just forget about that second ability. But also, this is, I think, really good if you have, 2 or more Blighted Burgeonings in your deck, and good. And then if you don't have multiple Blighted Burgeonings in your deck, it's very, very curve dependent. I think that this is probably just kind of generically played, even though, curves that have like not a lot of 3s and a lot of 4s are where this is best, and I think they're pretty unusual in green. And the best 4 is like Converter Beast, and like Tracker into Converter Beast is fine, but it's weird, right? Like, because the Converter Beast isn't immediately pressuring your opponent. I mean, like, it does let you attack with that 5/5 a turn earlier. It's probably fine. But green has a lot of good 3s, and so if your 3s are things other than Burgeonings, you're not really getting the most out of this card. And if you're trying to, like, if you're playing red-green and you're trying to, like, set up spots where you're attacking battles, or you're, like, playing, like, green-white backup or something, like, this is not an aggressive creature. Certainly not in a deck that's, like, trying to curve out aggressive creatures. So this is good in the, like, ramp fixing type decks, but not good in the kind of, like, generic curve out aggro decks. Up next, Chomping Kavu, 4 mana for a 3/3 backup 1. This creature can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. This is fine. The backup ability is sometimes really good. There are a lot of small creatures. Every now and then someone's like really planning to block with like a Aetherblade agent, and you back up and then they can't block with their Death Toucher, and that's very bad for them. But also this is just kind of, you know, medium-ish 4-drop. I don't know, it's the kind of card I could take or leave. It's probably pretty solid in your more aggressive decks and shouldn't be anywhere near your like green rampy decks. Up next, Goreclaw, Terror of Kalsisma. This is a 4 mana, 4/3. Creatures you control with power of 4 or greater cost 2 less to cast. When it attacks, each creature you control with power of 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and trample until end of turn. Obviously, we're seeing some amount of the like rare punishment here, where this is like taken pretty highly. And so it like costs a good pick to get in your deck, and then it's still just like a, you know, medium-ish creature with no immediate impact that dies to Volcanic Spite. I've had some decent experiences with this in decks that can use the like cost discount, and like the trample in particular is pretty nice, but it's also just kind of, you know, in that sort of awkward like 4 mana 3 toughness unimpressive body kind of space. I don't know. Up next, Kami of Whispered Hopes. I suspect that this one suffers some from being played outside of decks that, like, this card has 2 very different abilities. So this is 2 and a green for a 1/1 spirit. If 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a permanent you control, that many +1 counters are put on that permanent instead. And then tap, add X mana of any one color, where X is its power. So it both you know, is a mana creature and also is a Hardened Scales. And those are really different, and really different decks want them. And I think that this is best as a Hardened Scales. As a mana creature, it's a 3 mana creature. And it has like dreams of tapping for a lot of mana. But if you're like a, you know, the kind of ramp deck that should be playing pests and burgeonings, and you just like found this instead, and you're like, well, I guess this fixes, then you're unlikely to put a +1/+1 counter on it. And you have this kind of like more expensive, fragile like thing that you're relying on for fixing, but like your opponent can kill it if it looks like that's what's going on. But if you're like actually the like dedicated green-white counters backup deck, then this really like makes all your cards pop off. But I don't think that deck is all that good, such that I don't think it's something that you should be drafting all that often. But I do think that, like, my guess is that we're seeing low stats from this because of it being used in like mana creature decks rather than Hardened Scale decks. Up next, Serpent Blade Assailant, 2/1 backup 1 Death Touch. Filler body. Green has a lot of better 3 mana cards. It's acceptable if you're like, you know, deeply into the backup aggro deck, but I think that even in that space, it's actually worse than the white 2/2 Vigilance backup 1. Yeah. Up next, Fertilid's Favor. Worst in class green fixing card. Still sometimes play it if you're desperate for fixing and it fits well in your curve. 3 and a green instant. Target player searches their library for a basic land card, puts it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffles. put 2+1/+1 counters on up to one target artifact or creature. Yeah, this is weirdly in the exact same space as Kami of Whispered Hopes, where it can be played as like a +1/+1 counter synergies trick, or as a like really expensive rampant growth. Here, you really kind of want to get value out of both of them for it to like justify its cost, and it's not easy to get value out of both. There, are some like it's a reasonable trick in your like dedicated backup decks, and it's like passable fixing if you're short in your like Overgrown pest decks, but it's never, there's always a card that you would prefer that does this better, I guess. Up next, Ravenous Sailback. This was a pet card of Ham's. 5 mana for a 3/4. When it enters the battlefield, it either gains haste, usually to attack a battle, or it destroys target artifact or enchantment, usually an incubator token. Yeah, I mean, on its surface, there's a lot to like here in that there are a lot of incubator tokens that you can kill, and then you get this kind of like weird flame tongue type. Well, you get to kill a creature and have a creature, and that's nice. But your creature's pretty understated for 5, and if it's just killing a 2/2 incubator, then I don't really think that you've gotten 5 mana worth of card out of it. If it kills a 3/3 or bigger, you're probably pretty happy, but I don't know that that's like common enough to be excited about this card. Up next, Timberland Ancient, the Forest Cycler, 4 GG, reach 6/5, trample reach forest cycling. Yeah, this one is like green uses this relatively well in that sometimes you just want a 6 mana 6/5 reach trample in your deck as an expensive thing to cast. I guess that makes a funny point about at the very beginning of this, I was talking about like how good a 6/6 reach trample would be, 4 clicks without any extra text. And I think this card would be way better if it cost 1 less mana and didn't have forest cycling. Like way, way, way better. So yeah, the very nerfed 4 clicks would probably be about green's best common, thinking about how good Timberland Ancient is and how much I would like it for 1 less mana. As is, this one's, I don't know. None of the land cyclers are impressive. Sometimes I play this one. I feel like I'm most likely to play this specifically if I have Emoti. Because I like, cramming extra 6 drops in my deck in that case. But overall, this thing is very filler. Up next, Wildwood Escort. 5 mana for a 3/3 Gravedigger that exiles itself when it dies. It actually returns creature or battle. Just a bit clunky. I would like to like this card, but it's not hard to get the kind of value this is offering, I guess, at a comparable rate. And so, yeah, it's not embarrassing, but usually I have better sources of card advantage, I guess. Up next, War Historian, 3 mana for a 3/3 reach, indestructible while it's attacking a battle. I think War Historian's very good if you have a lot of battles to attack. It's really annoying when it's attacking battles, because like you don't want to let them flip the battle, but you can't kill it, and 3/3 is big enough that like early you probably don't have a thing that's blocking it for free. And green does appreciate like a 3/3 reach. There are not a lot of flyers that attack into it well. That said, this suffers from green's glut at 3. Like if you're not attacking battles, then you'd probably prefer to have like one of the other 3s instead of this. So like I feel like, the ramp decks would really like green's reach creatures to cost numbers other than 3 or 6. 6 is a little too much, and 3 is just like the turn that you want to be playing your like your fixing cards. But yeah, this card is, I think, quite good in your like actual aggro battle red-green decks. Up next, Iridescent Blade Master. This is another one that I think attacks battles decently and doesn't really do anything else useful. The fact that this hits for 4, that's like the same size. That's the amount of defense that most battles have. So like being able to have a 2-drop that can attack a battle, threaten to defeat most blockers, and threaten to kill the battle puts your opponent in a pretty awkward spot. But again, this is a format where mana sinks are easy to come by, and spending 4 mana for +2/+2 isn't as good as most of them. So this kind of suffers from that. Up next, Notvold Hermit is a 4 mana 4/4 for 5 in a Phyrexian blue. It transforms into a 5/5 that gives something else base power and toughness 5/5 until end of turn when it attacks. This is yeah, this just, I think, suffers from there being a lot of good removal, and like spending 4 and then 5 mana on a thing that is trying to attack is like pretty dangerous into Cut Short and Ifara's Dispersal and Deadly Derision. But yeah, you're just looking for immediate value on your 4 mana creatures or looking to not play them. There are a lot of like common and uncommon creatures in this space where they're like 4 mana and transform, and they look like a pretty solid total package, but they just have really bad stats. I think it's just that they line up pretty poorly against the removal in the format. Up next, Tribute to the World Tree, green. Enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card if its power is 3 or greater, otherwise put 2+1/+1 on it. This card can be very hard to grind against. I've certainly lost some games to it, but also it can be very hard to cast early enough to get what it's offering you out of it. It really needs to be played early, and at green, it's very difficult to do that. Chat points out that this is a picture of someone crying while literally pointing up at the casting cost, which is certainly an on-point evaluation of the card. I think, you need to have like 12-ish green sources in your deck as like a floor to really want to think about playing this card, and it's very rare that you have that, and I don't think it's really worth going out of your way to get that in green. So this is a card that I haven't played and don't really expect to play. I suspect that some of the games that I've won, my opponent has drawn this and I haven't known about it, and I've also lost some games to it, and that's just how it goes. Up next, Copper Host Crusher. 8 mana for an 8/8 trample hexproof. This is another one that I suspect that I've beaten people while they have it in their hand sometimes, because 8 is a lot of mana. However, I have also played it in some green decks with a lot of ramp, and I've been very impressed in kind of like somewhat slow mirror matches with this thing's ability to dominate a game. Just being larger than everything else and hexproof means that it very reliably blocks, and then like when it attacks, your opponent has to like double block and hope, and like you can have tricks to like blow them out, and they can have pump spells, but they can't like target your thing. I think that while this card has pretty bad stats, it has a decent ceiling in the right deck or the right matchup. Up next, Invasion of Muraganda. 5 mana for a Hunt the Weak that transforms into a 4/4 that at the beginning of combat on your turn, another target creature gets +2/+2 and loses all abilities until end of turn. But it does have 6 defense, which is a lot. The backside's not that great. And 5 is a lot of mana for a Hunt the Weak, especially in a format where the other fight spells are like better than usual. Hunt the Weak is kind of a below average fight spell. That's, I guess, if you're not familiar with Hunt the Weak, give a creature +1/+1 and then it fights something else. Give a creature a +1/+1 counter and then it fights something else. So yeah, this is in the class of 5 mana battle, like 5 mana removal spell battles that end up being just a bit too clunky. The games where this like works smoothly, it feels pretty good, but just a little too awkward all around. Up next, Atrax's Fall. Sorcery speed, destroy target artifact, battle, enchantment, or creature with flying for 1 and a green. This does have a lot of targets. You're usually going to hit something with it. I would probably be reasonably happy playing one of these if it were an instant. I don't think that would be a reasonable card to print. It's like a lot better than Disenchant at that point. But at Sorcery, I feel like this like upside that you get on it doesn't quite make up for how limited it is in terms of its ability to like actually kill creatures. I think that the stats suggest that this is not a card that you want to play, which is how I've felt about it. Up next, Yadora Grave Gardener, a 5 mana 5/5. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may return it to the battlefield face down under its owner's control as a forest. This just suffers from all of the things that, Not Vold, Hermit, and similar cards suffer from. This is really not a format where you're looking for a 5 mana 5/5, and the ability matters very little in this format. Would you play Atrax's Fall as an instant for 3 mana? I would like it slightly more. I don't know if I would play it or not. Up next, Renata, Called to the Hunt. 2 GG for a Devotion to Green /3, and each other creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Basically the same situation. You just don't want to be a 4 mana creature without immediate impact in this format. Renata can be pretty cool if it lives, but it's a bit understated and a bit expensive. Up next, Placid Rottentail. 1/1 Vigilance. 3 mana, exile it from your graveyard to put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature, activate only as a sorcery. I believe that I played this creature on day 1 and only day 1, and it didn't disappoint me. As a creature to like play in a backup deck to put counters on and then like exile to put counters on something else, I was like reasonably happy with all of that. The reason that I don't think the card is good or I haven't played it since is that I was unimpressed with the backup deck as a whole, even if I felt fine about this card in particular. I think this is like a weak card overall that aspires to a home in certain decks that lean on its synergy, but those decks just aren't good enough. Up next, Bonded Herdbeast. 5 mana 4/5. For 4 and a Phyrexian red, it transforms into a 7/5 menace. Again, all of these like mid-sized transform creatures just don't do well in this format that has pretty good removal. The only reason that I'm ever interested in this thing is if I have a number of overgrown pests, then I might want a random like expensive double-faced card to find instead of finding a land sometimes. And I think it's like an acceptable playable for doing precisely that thing. But otherwise, this is just not the kind of card you want, even if its numbers in general are kind of like abstractly fine. Up next, a very disappointing performance for Invasion of Chandelar. 3 green, when it enters the battlefield, return up to 3 target permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. Getting 3 cards back in the very late game is nice, but only being able to get permanents is pretty bad. This is very expensive and it requires a lot of setup. And then it's also a battle with 4 defense that transforms into a card that you really don't care about, because you can't really get value out of playing this until the extremely late game. And then what it does is at the beginning of combat, beginning of your upkeep, you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. The problem is, by the time you actually have done this thing, you can actually just tap lands and put permanents from your hand onto the battlefield, and it's usually going to be better. So for this is largely just like a sorcery that exiles itself and gets 3 permanents back, and that's just too clunky. Up next, the bad Vorinclex, the 8 mana one. 8 mana for a 7/6 trample that gives you a lot of lands and slows down your opponent's mana. 8 is just too much mana for a creature that doesn't really give you an immediate impact. Up next, Vengeant Earth. 1 in green instant. Target creature or land you control becomes a 4/4 elemental creature with haste in addition to its other types until end of turn. It must be blocked this turn if able. This, reads to me like it might be a kind of okay combat trick. Like, the ability to turn an incubate token into, +4/+4 and must be blocked to, maybe kill your opponent's good creature if it's the only thing that they have untapped. Plus the ability to, snipe something, either a creature or a battle with a land. It's always read to me like maybe there's something here, but also I've never played it, and the stats suggest there isn't. So, moving right along. Crystal Carapace, 4 mana, enchanted creature has +3/+3 and ward 2, and then this cycles for 2. There's just not really a reason to be interested in this card. I don't know, who it's for or what you'd want to do with it. This is not a particularly good format for auras, and I'm not really interested in paying, an extra mana to get ward 2 on, a 3 mana +3/+3 aura, and, cycling 2, I mean, I guess I'm usually going to cycle this because I don't really want what it's offering. There's a decent amount of death touch in this format. There's a lot of, this card's just bad. It's nuts with the one green-white Aftermath rare. Maybe it was put in a set so that it could play with Aftermath, and well, I really doubt that. Anyway, don't mess with this one. It's not where you want to be. And that wraps up green. Not sure there are any final thoughts here, so there you have it. I will not be back streaming tomorrow. I typically take Fridays off, so I suspect that the rest of the set review will have to wait until early next week. Thanks everyone for hanging out, and I may be on sometime this weekend. I won't be on tomorrow, and I definitely will be back Monday. Thanks for the subscription, Cosmo Hopper, and have a good night and weekend, everyone, and I'll see you later. Bye.